Um, so I'm gonna say something that sounds like clickbait until you realize that it's not. Okay. There is gold in Estes Park. And I don't mean Colorado has gold in the broad, obvious way. I mean, in this valley, right? In the Estes Valley system, in a place that most people only associate with elk and Longs Peak and their family vacations. And the reason I'm coming on here live to talk about it isn't because I want to start a rumor, okay? It's because I think we just bumped into a hidden chapter of this valley's overall story. And if you love Estes Park, and if you love Colorado, and if you love the idea that the ground under your boots has a past, you're going to want to hear this, okay? Because once you know this, you don't look at the valley the same again. So let me start with the moment that did it for me, okay? So I'm out there, I'm doing what I do, not looking for attention, not trying to go viral or anything. I'm just working, right? Just moving material, just doing the slow, boring, honest part. And then you get that flash, right? And you know the one. It's not the maybe, not the could be. It's just that clean little glint that doesn't move like mica, right? That doesn't behave like a rock. That moment is weird because it's quiet, right? It's not fireworks, it's not a trumpet. It's more like the valley clears its throat and goes, yeah, I'm still holding secrets. And my first thought wasn't even excitement, okay? My first thought was, no way, not here, because Estes isn't supposed to be this. Estes is the postcard version of Colorado. It's where people look up, not down. It's where people come to see the big stuff, right? The mountains, the sky, the wildlife, not a tiny heavy metal hiding in the gravel. So, I did what any sane person does when reality doesn't match the story. I just went backwards. I started asking, well, how could gold even be here? And that question is actually where the real story begins. Now, if you know Colorado history at all, you know the gold rush energy hit the state in the late, 1850s. It was the whole Pikes Peak era that rewired the region. People flooded into Colorado chasing metal and myth. And what's interesting is the official Rocky Mountain National Park timeline doesn't treat this area like some untouched fairy tale, okay? It shows human history moving through here deep in time. And then it shows the early settlers era too. It even marks that Joel Estes entered what is now Estes Park back in 1858, and he started a ranch. So Estes Valley wasn't some blank canvas. No, people were coming through here. They're living, they're hunting, they're building, they're naming things. I mean, they were coming in here and they were, trying to make a life up here in the mountains. And then the prospectors arrived. And here's where I want you to hear me, okay? This area has mining history, real mining history. Most people don't connect Estes Park to mining because it didn't become a famous gold town, right? It didn't become the next Central City or Breckenridge or Cripple Creek. But mining did happen in the region that later became, Rocky Mountain National Park. So when you begin to trace the record, you start seeing something that looks like and feels like a real pattern, right? It's a pattern of people just pushing into this country with hope in their pockets, right? And then getting humbled by the distance and the altitude and the hard math of reality of mining in the mountains. So let me take you over to the west side of the divide for a quick second here, okay? So the reason is because on the west side, there was a real mining push that happened in what's known as the Never Summer area. Now, the Park Service timeline flat out says there was mining on the west side of the park. It was Lulu City and the Gaskill towns that were established. And I think it put that window from 1874 up until 1886. If you guys know and I'm wrong on that, fact check me, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And when you dig into Lulu City, you find one of those really classic Colorado stories that burns bright and then just collapses flat, right? So Lulu City formed after silver was discovered back in 1879 by a prospector whose name was Joe Shipler, right? Now, for a moment, it looked like there might actually be a boom there in Lulu City. By 1881, the records they shows that I think there was like 40 cabins and some odd businesses that were out there. But then the ore, it just turned out to be low grade, and the cost of getting anything in and out of the Kawanichi Valley was just brutal. And it went into a quick decline and was basically done by 1885. Okay, so that story matters because it's not just a ghost town story. It's this land is hard and it doesn't care what you want kind of story. So people will romanticize over it, but if you read it right, it's the same lesson happening over and over and over again. The mountains don't hand anything out, okay? They make you earn the right to even be there. And Lulu City, it wasn't alone in that. There were other mining camps, right? And there were towns that were tied to that west side push. You had Dutchtown, Teller City, Gaskill, and a whole slew of others. The National Park Service, right? They have a document about mining in Rocky Mountain National Park, and it talks about multiple towns that were established to serve the mines, and notes that the real mining towns, they were on the west side, right? So you got this first big like aha kind of moment, right? The broader Estes Park region was absolutely touched by the mining era. Not just tourism, not just ranching, mining, prospectors, camps, boom and bust. And once you accept that, you start wondering what else is true that most people don't even talk about. Now, let's come back to the east side, all right? Because this is where it gets personal for Estes Park people, all right? There's this idea that the east side is just the gateway, right? It's the tourist side. But even on the east side, the record shows prospecting, right? So the National Park Service timeline notes that mining on the east side of the East Park, so you have the Eugenia and the Meeker mines, these happened in the late 1890s to the early 1900 windows. And one of those most famous examples is the Eugenia mine up in the slopes near Long's Peak. So the National Park Service, it actually has an entire article about it actually, and it says prospectors looked for valuable minerals in the area known as Rocky Mountain National Park. And the Eugenia mine was active in the 1800s, but ultimately it didn't pan out. It wasn't successful. So even here, even on the east side, right, people looked at those mountains and thought, maybe there's something in there, right? Maybe there's something worth chasing. And here's the part that really drives the point home for you, okay? There's an older national park historical document that says the literature contains vague references to prospecting on the east side. But the only prospecting site or mine it could clearly identify was the old Eugenia mine above the present Long's Peak Ranger Station, right? You can go up there today. And I think it also documented the mine was discovered in 1905 by Edward Cudahy and Carl Norwall, I think. And it was on file all the way until 1919. And it remembers that it was tunneled back into Battle Mountain over 1,000 feet, right? And they had a narrow track in mine cars. So think about that, right? 1,000 feet into a mountain in that environment, in that era. I mean, that's not casual, okay? That's obsession. That's men believing there's something in the rock that changes their life. And a lot of the time, the rock just says, no. So that's the second big aha moment, right? This valley and the land around it weren't just scenery for the rich and curious, okay? They were worked, they were tested, they were measured by people who believed there was actually hidden value here. Okay, so now here's where the story shifts, because all of that mining history is hard rock and silver and tunnels and camps. What we're talking about today is not a tunnel. No, it's not a mine. It's actually something much older than that. And in a way, it's almost more eerie, okay? Because it's not man-made, it's natural. And this is where the glaciers come in. And I know, people hear glaciers and their eyes just kind of glaze over because it sounds like a textbook at that point. But I'm telling you right now, if you want to understand why a valley that isn't known as a gold town could still hold gold, you have to understand what ice and water actually do to a landscape over time, right? The glaciers, they don't just carve pretty valleys, okay? They grind rock, they crush all the material down. I mean, they move entire worlds of gravel like it's nothing. And when they begin to retreat, the meltwater takes all of that crushed and mixed material and just starts to sort it, right? Um, you know, the glaciers, they shape terrain, right? They just deposit rocks, the ridges, the moraines, and you can see the legacy of glaciation all over Rocky Mountain National Park. And the Park Service will tell you about how scientists reconstruct past glacial extent by actually mapping the moraines, and that major glacial advances happened over tens of thousands of years, so they say. So imagine what that means in practical terms. Imagine you had a machine, right, that ran for thousands of years, a machine that scrapes, crushes, and mixes material, and then you had another machine that runs after it, right, and that's the meltwater. And that meltwater sorts that material layer by layer, deposit by deposit. And that's what built the valley sediments. And that's what built the gravel stories. And this is where the placer gold comes into the conversation, because placer gold isn't about a mining tunnel, right? Placer gold is literally about transport and sorting. It's about the heavy material moving and then getting trapped in the right places when the energy just changes in the river. And if glaciers and meltwater were doing the moving and the sorting here, then you start to see a way that gold can end up in the valley, even if Estes never became a famous gold town. It's not about a big strike, right? It's about the valley's bloodstream. Now, I'm going to tell you the part that tied the whole thing together for me, okay? 3 words: the high benches. If you lived in mountain country long enough, you start noticing that not all the gravel is equal, okay? There we go. Yeah. No, there we go. So I'm back. So as I was saying, yeah, so it's the high benches, right? What was I saying? It's down near the flow of the river. And some gravel is old. It sits higher. It sits, away from the modern channel. It looks like it doesn't belong where it is until you realize that it belongs to an actual older version of the landscape. So those high benches are like the valley's attic, okay? Old deposits that sit above the current system, because the valley, it just started to cut down over time, and it left all those deposits up high and behind. And when you're working old deposits, you're not just messing with today's gravel. You're touching a preserved moment of how the valley used to move its water and material. And that's why when gold shows up in those kinds of deposits, it's going to hit a little different, right? Because it's not just a random speck. It's evidence that the valley carried gold at some point, and that the sorting worked the way physics says it's going to work. And it's a little stamp, right, from deep time. So we'll let that be our third aha moment about about Estes Valley gold, because we're not just finding gold. We are confirming a story about how Estes Valley was built. Now, I want to be careful here because I'm live and people hear certain words and they can run with it. So I'm going to say this clearly. I am not claiming that Estes is some giant gold district, okay? I'm not claiming that you're going to come up here to Estes and you're going to get rich. That is not what this is. What I'm saying is this: the presence of gold in the valley is meaningful because it's unexpected, right? And unexpected things change stories. They change identity, right? They change how you see a place, because Estes Park is already loaded with history, just loaded. So You got the human story, the park story. We have our modern day tourism story, the building of the roads, the early lobbying for the park, all of it. But the mining story gets overshadowed because it didn't, win here in the way that it won in the rest of Colorado. No, it's literally a subplot. And what we're doing right now is I'm going to pull that subplot back into the light. We're saying, hold up. This place wasn't only a vacation land. This place was tested by the same hunger that tested the rest of Colorado. People pushed into these mountains looking for value, right? Sometimes they found it, sometimes they didn't. But the land always had the final say. And now the land, you guys, it's speaking again, quietly, in a pan, right? So let's talk about why I think this is important for the valley itself. Because people hear the word gold and they immediately jump to greed, or they jump to suspicion, or they even jump to drama. I'm not talking about any of that junk. I'm talking about identity and story. Estes Park is known worldwide as a gateway to Rocky Mountain National Park. It's known as a place of beauty, but beauty by itself can get shallow, right? Because people reduce it to postcards and Instagram. Now, gold, it does something different. Gold forces people to think about how this valley was actually made. Gold's going to force you to look at the ground and not just look at the skyline. You're going to be forced to see Estes as a living geological story, not just some scenic backdrop. And I think that's a good thing, because when people respect the ground, they respect the place. And when they see the valley as history, they stop treating it like it's a theme park. And that's what this can mean, right? It's a deeper kind of pride. It's not hype pride, it's real pride. It's the kind of pride that comes from understanding. Now, I'm going to say something that's going to hit some of you right in the chest, because I can already feel the comments in the air. There is something undeniably cool about owning a piece of local history. And I don't mean some fake gift shop story. I mean a real piece of the valley, a real piece of what, the glaciers and the water and the time built here. That idea is powerful, because it's not about money. It's about connection. It's about being able to hold something in your hand and know it came from this place, from the Estes Valley system, from the hidden chapter. And I'm going to be straight with you, because I don't like dancing around what everybody's thinking. If I show you real Estes Park gold coming out of the ground, close up, no tricks, some of you are going to want to see more. You're going to want to know the story. You're going to want to feel connected to it. That's human. And I think that's what this series is going to be about. This is not a treasure hunt, okay? This is a story hunt. So let me bring this all back to the present, and let's move on to the apex of this live stream here, because everything I've just said, the mining towns, the tunnels, the West Side camps, the Eugenia mine, the glaciers, all of that is the buildup, okay? Here it is. We found gold in the Estes Valley system, in a place where most people don't even believe it exists. And the second you prove that, everything changes, because now it's not a theory, okay? It's not folklore. It's not maybe. No, this is real. And what I'm going to do in the next live streams and the episodes that we're going to be putting out is I'm going to take you along for that. I'm going to show you the gold. I'm going to show you the process. I'm going to explain why I think it's there without turning this into a location giveaway circus. And I'm going to keep pulling the thread on the history, because here's what I think is happening. All right. A story that, there's a deeper story here, right? It's been sitting here the entire time in Estes. It's a story that includes early settlers, the park's creation, the tourism, and the mining era's shadows on the edges, and that raw geological machinery of ice and water that actually built the valley's deposits. And we just found a physical piece of that story. That's why it matters. That's why I'm amped, because it's not gold, you guys. It's proof that the valley is, more than what people assume. Proof that our ground here has memory. Okay, so let me lock this up into a clean ending here, because, I feel like a good story earns its landing, right? At the beginning of this live stream, I told you there's gold in Estes Park. And maybe you thought I was trying to sell you a headline, right? But now you've heard the arc, okay? You've heard the West Side mining push and the towns that burned out, Lulu City rising fast and dying fast. And, these mountains, they're expensive. And ore doesn't always justify the dream. So we also talked about the East Side mining, right? So you had the Eugenia mine and how deep people pushed into the rock, chasing that possibility. And then you've heard that the glaciers, right? They built this landscape by grinding and depositing and leaving the moraines and outwashing all the material that water then sorted. And now, the modern moment where we're sitting right now, when time has enough room to work. So here's where I land. Estes Park is not just a place you visit. It's a place that was made by ice, made by water, made by pressure, made by human hunger too, okay, and in different seasons of history. And if you love this place, you should want to know that full story, not the postcard, the real thing. Now, I want to bring you into it. If you want the next episode where I show the gold close up on camera and break down what we're actually seeing, I want you to type in the comments, show the gold. Okay. And if you ever like the idea of owning a real piece of Estes Park history someday, something small and real and actually local and tied to this valley's hidden chapter, right? Just type piece of Estes down below. And last thing, because this is how you stay in the loop, right, with this stuff, you need to hit like, you got to subscribe, and you got to do the notification bell thing, because that's how you're going to get contacted to know that I'm doing these things. Because the next streams are where I'm going to stop talking about it. I'm going to start showing it. And when you see that first bright flash of real Estes Park gold in the pan, you're going to understand exactly why I'm making a big deal out of this. Everybody comes up here looking for the mountains, okay? Just looking up at them. But once you know this in the valley, you start looking down too. All right, you guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out. I appreciate it. And yeah, I hear you. Maybe I do need to start making mocks again. If you guys are interested in seeing some RM3 mocks back on the market, let me know. All right, you guys, take care.